All right, welcome back to the final episode of September 2025. I can't believe we're heading into Q4 and, heading into Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas, Hanukkah, Kwanzaa,
Crazy.
whatever you're celebrating these days.
Yeah.
It's this was, I think, arguably the fastest year I can ever remember by far.
I agree.
By far. You feel the same, Phyllis?
Yes. I think you know what they say, as you get older, the time flies. I think we're getting older, sadly.
Possible. Very possible.
It is flying. All right. So as we get people in and takes a few minutes, want to talk about a few things before we introduce our guests. Welcome, Eric. Good to see you. Good to see everybody joining in. Wanted to share something out with you all. A few things that caught my eye this week, and I'll share my screen. And Chris, maybe you can be my eyes. Let me know if you can see.
Yeah, that's great.
Okay. So this just published, Chris. This is like, I guess we could say, like firewalls these days. RMM is the gift that keeps giving. Again, this isn't, I'm not here to bash Screen Connect. I just want to be very clear, just the way I'm not when we talk about a firewall. This is what threat actors are focusing on. They're focusing now much more on SaaS-based applications, Phyllis, as we know, especially as this points out right away, with adversarial in the middle. This is no different, Chris, really, than an M365 attack, right? It's just we're going to use a different ruse. And in this case, the ruse is that your Screen Connect instance was compromised. And Chris, we're going to let you reset credentials, which takes you to a portal that looks a lot like Screen Connect. And of course, this is your adversarially in the middle attack, a la taking over your creds and your system. And what stood out about this is just the ecosystem of threat actors where they're really focused on credential harvesting of these accounts and then targeting very, very specific spear phishing to these administrators, not just MSPs, but these are specifically, Chris, to IT. And, as we know, Screen Connect focuses not just on MSP, but, and customers. So anything stand out to you about this one, Chris? And
I mean, it seems like we have this Screen Connect on a calendar where it gets targeted, right? So it's not one of these things that gets targeted, but at least it's like once a year. Something happens around Screen Connect, and knowing the folks over at ConnectWise, they respond very quickly. But what I think this is you're exactly right. It's like 365, but it's after a very specific audience. But at the same time, it's after harvesting a lot of credentials for some attack. So that could be an attack that they're going to start doing next week. It could be something that happens a month from now, or kind of the dust is where everybody's thought that the dust is settled. And now they kind of like Akira has been doing with the Sonic Wall stuff, same type of stuff here. So yeah, they're going after those credentials that they know are going to have big payoffs if they're able to get in with them.
Right. Exactly. Phyllis, is this, again, as we've been talking more and more, as 9 is in the crosshairs right now, version 9 of CIS. And, we've asked a lot about what's new, what's coming, knowing that, these SaaS-based attacks are really just, it seems like we've got two very specific topics that are just this recurring nature right now. It's internet-facing devices and SaaS-based applications, whether it's OAuth attack, adversary in the middle attacks. Obviously, there's other things. I'm not saying this is the only two genres that we should worry about, but it certainly seems to be the du jour of threat actors these days. So I'd love your take on it.
Yeah, I agree. It's definitely something that the team is looking at. Right now we're updating the community defense model to CDM 3.0. And so I'm anxious to look out, what those attack patterns look like and how that changes our prioritization, as we talked about before. Like, even if a safeguard doesn't change for example, because it's still, an effective mitigation. Does the order change?
Right.
Does the party change? Which, I think is something that for sure is on the table for the team to look at.
Yeah, I hope that we do see some of that, Phyllis, because that would, to me, would make sense, right?
Mm-hmm.
Talked a lot about, hey, inventory, and historically, I think, look, I mean, I'm never going to go against, the principles of you can't defend what you don't know about, right? We know that, but it would certainly seem that, man, from a prioritization standpoint, there are certain things where, at least from an inventory's perspective, we better know our SaaS inventory, or we better know our internet-facing device inventory really well, because that is what they are going after in a major way.
I think we definitely need to, when we talk about inventory, call out SaaS. I think it's mentioned kind of like in the beginning, but definitely call out, what do you need to know from your SaaS app for your inventory? We never differentiated that in the past. So that's something definitely that the team needs to look at for sure. And that definitely is something that we're actively looking at.
Cool. So Eric, how about from you, from the MSP perspective, running into any of these adversarial in the middle attacks over the past year? What are your thoughts?
We see a lot of that, unfortunately, all too often. When you think about how you have to inventory and you can't defend what you don't know, it brings up the importance of security awareness training for all of your users, right? So we have to really, get user 2.0, make them highly aware of malactors out there and the ability to spot something that doesn't look right. And, that's kind of where we focus on a lot of this, is that making sure that our users are the best educated they can be.
Very cool. One other, and then we'll kick things off, is this, I see Tina on here and some of the folks that I see often on some other calls, is this, this is in the news quite a bit. Now, whether it's the LastPass, this is the one that's the most recent, but the bigger thematic here, Chris, are these click fix attacks. Basically, these are, for lack of a better word, again, a kitted up environment as a service in the threat actor ecosystem for about $1,000 a month. And what's, really fascinating or very scary about this, Chris, is, the number of impersonated solutions. It also highlights GitHub in this, that, Chris, I mean, this is becoming the playground, it seems, of threat actors. And what they're doing is literally putting in these ads. These ads are actually coming up in Google searches. And so it's like, hey, I want LastPass for my Mac. Well, guess what? You're going to get served up this potentially, which is going to take you to a seemingly, place that would give you that information and that LastPass. But however, it is certainly not. These click fix attacks come in a variety of fashion. Tina, who's on the call, has dealt with these from a CAPTCHA perspective. That one is certainly on the up and up. Chris, have you dealt with these at all? And if so, what's the experience?
Yeah, I've seen it. It's interesting how these things kind of operate. Is obviously individuals seem to be the target here. So you hear a lot of people that may have fallen victim to one of these, and one way or another, the threat actor gets in there. Sometimes I've heard where they're able to get in and get a hold of cryptocurrency, and we're able to figure out a way to get that out. Some other ways. What's interesting about these is also they come across maybe credentials that belong to somebody in a corporate sense. So maybe they're kind of targeting the individual, but they get lucky and they get somebody else, a bigger fish, and then they go after them that way. So, and then, or like I've seen some prior other types of attacks where another threat actor group has, quote, guessed someone's password. Well, it's quite, they could have guessed it, or they could have been able to get it from one of these other sources that were gained through some of this click fix stuff. I mean, it's interesting that I'm not surprised. I mean, it does. This is not one of these things that's just transparent and that happens to somebody. As the user or the victim, you have to perform some actions. But I mean, people, they get a lot of alerts. They get a lot of stuff all the time. They get that fatigue and they just do it. And it's tough to fault them. And you do. It all comes down to, like, Eric was talking about. You have to train your people and stay on top of them and let them know this stuff exists out there. And they're going to be going at, like, all those apps that you saw on there. Those are well-known apps that a lot of people trust. And so those are going to be the easy ones to dupe people over.
Yeah, good point. All right, so let's do it. Was reintroduced. I spoke with Daniel. Gosh, Daniel, you'll tell me again the organization you were with prior, but it was
I was with the National Cybersecurity Alliance, I think, when we first met.
Yeah. And Joy Balan reached out and she's like, man, you got to reconnect with Daniel. He's doing some great work over at NIST, and lo and behold, he sure is. I'll put the URLs and some of the work he's just recently released, both this small business primer and quick start guides. Really, I mean, impressive. And when I say impressive, Daniel, please don't take this as sarcasm. For NIST, that typically launches 400-page documents, this. And I need to bring on Jacob Horn to literally just somehow just demystify what anything is being said. You did a hell of a job really simplifying these, making it consumable, right? So great job. So we wanted to talk about those with you today while I'm asking you for an intro. And for those that may not know about NIST, although I'm sure most do, if you could tell us a little about yourself and your role, your background, Daniel. I'll throw these two pieces of work that you did in the comment section. So welcome, Daniel. Thanks for joining.
Thank you. Yeah, pleasure being here. Thanks for the invitation. And Joy, if you're out there, thank you for reconnecting us. Yeah, so Daniel Eliot, I'm the lead for small business engagement within the Applied Cybersecurity Division of NIST. And so the work that I'll be talking about today actually goes across divisions. So I work across the Information Technology Laboratory, really focusing on, all right, how can we make some of our content more consumable? How can I introduce some of these core concepts to the small business community in different ways? How can I engage the small business community in kind of informing our work and making sure they're aware of who we are and what we do? And so, I have been working with small businesses and small business cybersecurity for over a decade now, and it's a pleasure to get to do it. It's a passionate, it's a passion of mine, and it's rewarding. And being part of NIST is part of the U.S. Department of Commerce, and so we are focused on, with small businesses being such a significant portion of the U.S. economy and economies around the world, really focusing on NIST's mission of driving U.S. innovation and global competitiveness. And small businesses are a critical piece of innovation and competitiveness, and we want to be sure that I'm doing what I can to help them understand kind of how to deploy, kind of how to build in a cybersecurity risk management strategy into their business to help them grow securely.
Yeah, absolutely. And what's cool about, I think, both CIS and NIST, Daniel, is you guys play really well in the sandbox together. I know when 2.0 came out, one of Phyllis's big missions right away was to have a revision to version 8, which they did relatively quickly to align with the governance piece of 2.0. So it's good to have both areas of both representations, if you will, on this. Isn't really the North and the South Civil War. This is, more working in tandem together. So with that, Eric, let me let you kick things off with Daniel. And for those that don't know, Eric was is playing the role of Gary today, and he's on a boat of all things with some really good connectivity. So thanks for joining in, Eric.
Thank you. Starlink's a wonderful thing. Daniel, thanks for being on the call, and nice to meet you.
You.
Now, if we look back to 2014, what were the kind of the main motivations of building out the framework? And, after we got that framework done and, back a decade ago, what was the motivation of, bringing out 2.0?
Yeah, well, I mean, the framework development process started, or was initiated, I should say, with an executive order, right? Executive Order 13636, and that was released in 2013, and the president tasked NIST with the development of a cybersecurity framework. So NIST wasn't, around saying, "Hey, let's create a cybersecurity framework." It came from an executive order first, and then that executive order was then followed. It was followed by the Cybersecurity Enhancement Act of 2014, and that really codified it. And so the first framework was published in 2014 as the title, the Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity, a mouthful. And so that it went through a revision back in, I think, in 2018. I think it was when it was updated lightly to 1.1. But from the initial creation of the framework to 2.0, it all involved significant engagement from stakeholders. Probably all of you submitted comments individually or on behalf of organizations, or participated in requests for information, participated in our workshops. The 2.0 process really started in 2022 when we published a request for information. And it was really, that kickstarted everything. And the crux of the question was, hey, are you using the CSF? What's working? What's not? What's changed in the last 10 years that you think we need to address? How are you using the CSF? And so that really kickstarted everything and got people talking, and through all the workshops and concept papers and drafts, we arrived at the age of 2.0 in February of 2024. So that's it was really through massive amounts of input and stakeholder engagement, and a lot of deep, thoughtful discussions with business leaders and practitioners from practically every sector from around the globe.
Well, I imagine that the challenge from going from executive order down to the NIST framework to your standard small business owner, I imagine that communication channel was very narrow, if not at all, right? We start talking about small business leaders, they're like, NIST what cybersecurity controls?
Well, yeah.
And I think
I was going to say, I was one of those people when in 2014, when the initial when the initial CSF was published, I was like, okay, this is cool. And then I read through it and I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to work with my small businesses how am I going to get that? How am I going to get them to understand this? And so I was one of those voices saying, hey, NIST, you need to create this.
And so that probably prompted the quick start guide. And, have you seen an adoption of that by, small business leaders? And how's that been going?
Yeah. So, as I kind of alluded to, like NIST publications and cybersecurity frameworks as a whole, right, are a lot for small businesses. They can be overwhelming for even cybersecurity professionals. And so when I began looking at the cybersecurity framework 2.0, I began kind of with my small business hat on, having worked in small business and with small business for so many years, looking at the outcomes and the implementation examples and thinking, all right, what are some that are applicable to a resource-constrained environment? And I had a lot of ideas about that already. But once I started drafting it, I started kind of socializing it with small businesses to see, hey, am I on track here? Does this make sense to you? Am I missing anything? Does it sound too governmenty? Because I don't want it to sound too governmenty. I want it to sound like you can read it and understand it, that is consumable. And so, we even ran it through our usability experts here at NIST who have, PhDs in, usability and cognitive and behavioral psychology and such, to have them look at it and say, does it pass a test from a usability standpoint? And so we were really happy with how it turned out. And I wanted to make it look, I didn't want it to be overwhelming. I wanted it to be, what are some things that you as a small business can prioritize, that you can get started. It's not the CSF, right? It's just a quick start guide. It's just a very small piece of the CSF. And of course, organizations have to take their own unique environments and resources into consideration, because it's not exhaustive.
Right. Most organizations don't have a cybersecurity team, and if even the ear of the owner or the president of the small business.
Right. And so that's one of the reasons why I also built in some of the questions throughout the quick start guide. Because I'm like, beyond just saying, hey, you should enable multi-factor authentication. What are some questions that you should be asking yourself, or maybe taking these questions to your MSP or MSSP to begin having a dialogue? Because I think not only being told or kind of having kind of some outcomes and what to do is important, but I also think being equipped with some good questions to think about is also a good resource or a good tool to have. So
it sounds like a good first step for someone that's been exposed to this cybersecurity. Quick start guide was to, like you said, get some of those questions together and approach your MSP or someone else.
Quick. And by the way, Joseph just commented about 800-171. Daniel, you can comment in a minute on that with your other document we're going to talk about, because that does hit on that quite a bit. But what about the distribution? And let me define what I mean by distribution of this. Like, when you think about small business, we know the majority of them do work with MSPs. Like, what's the mechanism from this perspective of getting this out broad and wide? Like, do they use things like the Small Business Administration, or do they think about collaborating with MSPs? Or, knowing NIST also has to play Switzerland, I know that in very well after in working with them and going to, specifically Chris and I have made trips there. But how do you do that? Or is there a mechanism for doing that? And how do we, with a group of MSPs that, rely on a lot of publications from NIST, is there a cross section of working together?
Yeah, I have a lot of thoughts on that. So one, I recognize that many small businesses are not the ones that are coming to NIST's website, right? I'm not naive. And if I walk down to my bagel shop around the corner, they're not going to know who NIST is. So, I rely on the MSP community, the MSSP community. I rely on small business development centers, women's business centers, veterans business centers as the amplifiers. They're really kind of my first place to go if we have a new resource or if we have a new event or anything else, to then amplify it. And so that's why I prioritize doing stuff like this, to raise awareness of the resources we have and the fact that we have a community of interest on the NIST Small Business Cybersecurity Corner website. That's another vehicle that when I came in, we launched to try to engage vendors and resource partners and small business owners together to kind of start talking about these things. And a lot of these resources went to members of the community of interest to get their input before they're published. So, I rely on communities like you because you're the people who are educating and working with the small businesses and the boots on the ground, if I can use that, versus me. I'm just one person. So I rely on the amplifiers to kind of spread this. And the other federal agencies are just as critical, right? So, yeah, making sure that the SBA, that we're linking to our resources and that they're aware. I'm talking to CISA just in 2 days, making sure that we're in alignment so that, one thing I don't want to do is duplicate efforts. So if I'm talking to FTC, what are you doing with small business cybersecurity? Making sure that we're trying to streamline things and not duplicate efforts as much as possible.
Yeah, that's great. And maybe we hold off, but Joseph's comment on 800-171, can you maybe just briefly talk about, because I know we're going to go more in depth, but what's the intent of the small business primer? Because I think that is part of the remit, right, Daniel, that you had there to make things a little bit more distillable when we talk about CUI and what small business have to.
Yeah, I apologize. I don't see the question, but I'll kind of talk about the primer itself, and really the small business primer for 800-171 Rev 3. The goal of it, I think of the word. I chose the word primer intentionally instead of quick start guide, because it would be hard for me to say that there's a quick start to 800-171. But as far as primer goes, right, I think of it in terms of paint, right? You paint a nice primer on the wall or on something. It gives you a light foundation. It's not the final product, but it's going to kind of fill some gaps and holes and get you set up for success. And then you put on the nice coat afterwards. I think of the primer kind of like that, right? This isn't 800-171. 800-171 is 800-171. The primer is trying to help small businesses think about, all right, I heard some background noise. I don't know what that was. What are some of the terms that are used in this publication, and what do they mean? Where's some places that I can get started? Because not everything at 800-171 is technology centric, right? There are policies and procedures and training our employees and things that you can do with that. And so the goal of it is, again, not to replace the foundational document. It's just to kind of lay a foundation to help small businesses understand where they can get started with it. And again, it also kind of has some questions within it as well to think about, some resources that not only NIST has created, but resources from trade associations, from nonprofits, from other federal agencies, to kind of bring these together into this document. And so it's really just focused on, how do I get started with 800-171? That's the goal.
Daniel, you got some compliments on your analogy for the painting. But when you started it off, the first person that popped in my head was Bob Ross. And I think there's something you can do there. I think you can somehow contact the estate of Bob Ross and maybe use Bob Ross as your analogy for building on this stuff.
Maybe I could put a wig on Ron Ross.
Yeah, for those that don't know, maybe just touch on Ron Ross, because he's a legend, Daniel, who Ron Ross is at NIST.
Yeah, well, Ron Ross is now retired from NIST, but was a fellow before retirement, and which is one of the most prestigious levels of employment at NIST. And he is a leader in cybersecurity risk management and systems design, and was part of our cybersecurity, computer security division, and one of the lead authors, of course, on many of the publications that came out of computer security division, including 800-171. And so another colleague that we're sad to lose. Is an excellent resource.
I think with the right wig, though, he could pull it off.
Yeah. Ron also, he actually wrote the -53. He wrote the 800-53.
Yeah. Amazing. Like we got to go to the NCCOE ones, Daniel, me, Chris, and I don't know, we had like 10 or 12 MSPs. This was back in the day when we were trying to, really integrate MSPs. You and I had this conversation offline. But it was amazing. He came in and gave us kind of an hour of his time. And it was one of the highlights of, at least my career in this industry.
I agree. It was incredibly memorable. I don't think I'll ever forget that trip at all. That was awesome.
Yeah, he's a person you want to take notes when he's speaking.
Very, very true. So Eric's back. Let me get Eric back in. What happened? Yeah. Did the pirates take over the ship, or what happened?
I've been on vacation, thus being on my boat, and I hadn't had my laptop on. And as soon as you turn your laptop on, all of the security patches come on, and they reboot on you. Sorry about that. I apologize.
That's right. Your timing was impeccable, because we were just talking about a few things, and we're kind of into your third question there on.
Okay.
Yeah. So perfect timing.
Now, one of the greatest recommendations I saw was do a profile, and do a current profile versus an after profile. You want to go in a little bit on the theory and reasons why that's happening.
And Daniel, maybe since we're doing analogies, should we say this is like Match.com? You look at your profile.
I want to be careful about how many analogies I use. I don't want to. The profiles are an important part of the cybersecurity framework. And really, when we're talking about profiles, that's a strategic tool. I view the CSF as a strategic tool. It's a much higher level of abstraction, right, than what we were just talking about with 800-171. And so when you think about profiles, you have kind of where we are, which is the current state, and where we want to be or where we need to be, which is the target state. And I view them side by side, really. And our template that we provide for profiles is one document that you can view your current and target side by side. And so it's a strategic planning tool where, say, first, we need to know where we are. That's always a great first step. Where are we in our cybersecurity risk management as far as it relates to the cybersecurity framework outcomes? Then with the target state, it's looking at, all right, maybe there's a new regulation coming out or a new technology that we plan to adopt. Where do we need to be with cybersecurity risk management? What new outcomes do we need to be achieving in order to address that or meet that? And then what you have sandwiched in between is that gap analysis. All right, here's where we are, here's where we want to be or where we need to be. So where do we fill in the gaps? And what are some controls that we need to do to fill the gaps? What are maybe we change our risk appetite, or risk measurements as far as we accept a risk or transfer it, however it is, but it's beginning to understand kind of where we are and where we need to be or want to be, and then analyzing the gaps in between. So it's just a strategic tool. And so there are really two mechanisms for profiles. There's the organizational profile, which is an internal exercise for business and confidential between just the business leadership and implementers and all of that within the organization. Then there's a community profile, which is a profile that's publicly available for a group of like-minded organizations that want to try to understand the CSF outcomes and kind of evaluate or establish priority ratings for different outcomes within the CSF. And so one that just published today for public comment, actually right before this call, was the manufacturing community profile that updated to CSF 2.0. And so if you're in the manufacturing sector and interested in submitting comments to that, please do. But there are profiles for the financial services sector. There are community profiles for telcos, community profiles for specific technology areas like or risks like ransomware profile. So it's really just taking a specific community and coming together in a consensus-driven way to say, we agree about this. These outcomes and these priorities for these outcomes within our organizations. And so it's just a great exercise for a group of similar organizations to come together. And so I like to talk about that because we're always encouraging kind of communities to come together and create these. And you don't have to have NIST involved. You can just create them, as your own. But these profiles are really just to get you thinking about whether it's community or the organizational profile, how we're applying the CSF outcomes, to what extent, and kind of are there gaps for our current state where we are and where we need to be or want to be.
Yeah, I think real quick, I'm sorry. I think it's very effective. I think number one, the approach of a current state and target state. A lot of business people can understand that. I think it's it's universal. You can be a company of 10 people. You can be a company of 100,000 people. It applies universally. And I've always liked the profiles. I think the profiles has helped kind of what kind of to match it up, but it does allow people to say, oh, okay, I see this is not just something that they're trying to globally apply. They have basically ways of speaking my language in my industry. And then it can not only help the dialogue between you as a service provider and your client, but I think it also facilitates the dialogue between peers in the industry, right? So that they're all kind of working off the same language and the same stuff. They can start to talk together, whether it's informally or whatever. But I do think it's very effective.
Chris, what I was going to say, I think you're spot on, and the way you can weave this in for those that I think Eric might know about, EOS and traction by Gino Wickman, but for those that are businesses understand operating models, right? And EOS is a great one, and if you look at the beginning of traction, right, and you're looking at your business, and this is the analogy because we always want to link it back to the business, say, look, you think about your business and you have a vision for your business, right? I mean, that's one of the most critical things. Well, what you have this vision for your business. Let's talk about also what's, your current state and your vision in terms of managing risk and how that impacts or could impact the revenue that your company drives. Because if you don't take into account risk, it's like, Eric's out in the water in his boat and goes, I don't care what, I'm not even going to look at the weather, right? I'm just going to leave, right, Eric? That wouldn't go too well, would it?
No, and the profile that you guys are building is kind of the foundation of the roadmap, right, to where you want to be. So you can actually start weighing the risk of doing something versus not doing something and get that onto your roadmap and budget accordingly. That we all should be doing quarterly.
Yeah, good stuff. All right, Phyllis, let's head on over to you, and feel free to slander NIST any way you want, coming from CIS. And,
that's more in my NSA days.
Oh, okay, all right.
NSA and NIST are frenemies. The CSF 2.0 introduced govern as the sixth function. What I really like is when you see the diagram, the govern covers all of, it's like the inner ring. And on the outside are identify, protect, detect, respond, and recover. So how is it that NIST decided to add govern and put it really, as the same level as the other NIST functions?
Yeah, that, there were pieces of governance, right, and throughout CSF 1.0 and 1.1. But when we were talking with practitioners and stakeholders, particularly the financial services sector, they were really focused on bringing governance up into its own function. And so a lot of that came from discussions and from our public and cross-sector engagement. And so it was really so elevated into its own function, again, also to help organizations, as you talked about, that being in the center of that beach ball or whatever people want to associate that color wheel with, to help organizations really set strategy for cybersecurity risk management. It underpins everything you do. Governance underpins everything you do in all the other functions of identify, protect, detect, respond, recover, right? It serves as kind of that guiding light for the other 5 functions, to help you, as I said, set direction, to tie our cybersecurity risk management to the broader enterprise risk management and our organizational strategy, to articulate roles and responsibilities. Who's responsible for cybersecurity risk management, right? And that's important even for a very small business. They don't have an enterprise risk manager, but somebody's got to be responsible. And so having kind of these discussions and this governance underpinning cybersecurity risk management is really critical for kind of success as you move throughout REST.
I think it was great that NIST did that to show the importance of those policies and procedures that most organizations kind of put on the back burner versus like, give me the tool. What do I need to just implement? So I think it's great that NIST stood up and did that, because when you look at all the different, other kind of like attack-ish type things, everyone like goes to like MFA or, whatever it's going to be, versus, like we said in the beginning, you have to know what you have in order to defend it. So it's nice that those procedures for managing your vulnerability management program and all those other things. So I think I think it was great that NIST did that. So, you went and you talked to organizations that actually, like the FSI-SAC or financial sector, the practitioners. And so, we want to focus on small, mediums here. So for a 50-person firm, what is the minimum viable governance stack that an organization can implement? So what policies, the risk register, roles authority, and how often should organizations be looking at that and refreshing it? So, most 50-person organizations use an MSP. And yet we hear on this call week after week, getting those organizations to focus on and implement governance is very challenging.
Yeah, that's I mean, the governance stack, that's I feel like you all would probably be better at answering that than me. But I think, if I'm talking to many small businesses in general, I would hope that the small business of that particular size would at least have some basic acceptable use policies, right? Would have password policies, which is part of govern, an incident response plan, so that we know what to do when something happens. Basic access control policies. Mm-hmm. So I was on a webinar a few weeks ago with the aftercare, the auto aftercare market, which is, think of like mechanics. And one of the small businesses on the call said, we had backups, and they had a breach or an incident, and they said we had backups and everything, but what we didn't do was we didn't lock down our admin access, and so more people had admin access than needed, and so it actually impacted our backups. Yeah. And so having some of these basic kind of control policies in place, I think, would be important. Granting access and removing access to new and employees and vendors and those who are transitioning out, having a basic cybersecurity training, these are things I would think, as you're thinking of a small business, that they would be. And again,
I would have to say, as I'm listening to you, implementation group 1, anyone? That's what it sounds like. And I have to respond to Eric Wells. Thank you for saying it's an awesome question, but I have to give credit where credit is due. Andrew Morgan creates all these questions. Although I did deliver it pretty well.
You did.
Hence why you get the question and not me.
She just let out the secret. We're all unpaid actors here, everyone. So.
I know. Andrew's up here pulling our marionette. We're just like,
But Phyllis, it does speak to implementation group 1, but access control management. I mean, it's a really, if you, I don't know, Eric, if you've taken the CIS guide and just literally the implementation guide from CIS, and if they do a really good job of summarizing that in particular, what Daniel just said.
Yeah, just like a data. Most companies need to have a data policy, right? How long are you going to hold on to data? What do you do with that data when you're no longer using it? What are you going to back up? And then even more governance that most companies have is cyber insurance policies, right? There's some absolute governance in those policies if you want to get covered.
One thing I do have a question, maybe just for Chris, because he does a lot of tabletop exercises. Chris, one thing that struck me, and this was in like a 2,000, 2,500 person organization. I was speaking to the HR director, chief people officer.
Mm-hmm.
And it was almost like a firewall when I was talking to this individual about awareness training. And it was like, no, that's security's job. And when we think about policy, it's really right. Like, why isn't somebody at the chief people officer level? Like, is that common that you see in a lot of the, even whether it's 250, 500, 2,000, and why is it so disconnected if it is common?
Well, I'll tell you, it's a good question. So number one is we see where none of it occurs, right? And then it just seems like the other extreme where it occurs in silos. So whether you're talking about, Daniel brought up incident response planning. The last 2 weeks I've been on the road and I've been doing talks to treasurers, controllers, CFOs, and the finance and HR are left out of incident response planning a lot, right? They're pulled in during an event, but all the planning and tabletop exercise, they're not in there. The same thing goes with cybersecurity awareness training. But what I've also seen it flip to where it's all in HR and nothing in security. And so I think there's this, I don't know, there's probably a better word, but there just seems to be this trend or this this behavior where it's very difficult for things to be cross-organizational when it comes to cybersecurity. And people seem to want to stick it in one place and have that group own it, handle it, and deal with it, and not share it across the lines. And it's rare. Especially for me, I come across it rare when it's not cross-organizational. I'm not saying it doesn't happen. I've seen some companies that are exceptional, but operationally, maturity-wise, they're exceptional. So I do think it's kind of a symptom of that in itself. But it's a good point. I mean, it's not relevant, right? I mean, it's just especially the larger you get, if you just have security driving everything and making all the decisions on it, it's just not relevant. And HR is going to know better. They're going to be able to provide some significant input and feedback and all that kind of stuff. So you're right. It's it needs to be solved. I don't know how else to put it.
At the NSA, we would joke, we would call them cylinders of excellence.
That's a good one.
Everything is so siloed, and it's like, especially within one organization a lot of time, right? So we would jokingly refer to it like that.
Might steal that term going forward.
You can use it. So the next question is, how does the CSF 2.0 connect to other standards like the 171 or CMMC? And what role should SMBs see it playing in their broader compliance or maturity journey? Especially, right now, a lot of, the MSPs are supporting so many different organizations in different verticals. And you see that playing across this community, especially with CMMC.
Yeah, I mean, well, you mentioned 800-171. So that is a document that's very specific, right, in its goal to, it's a set of recommended security requirements for the protection or the confidentiality, protecting the confidentiality of controlled and classified information. Very, very specific. It doesn't explicitly address integrity and availability. So it's not a robust, it's not to be used as a robust kind of cybersecurity risk management strategy. It's for the protection of the confidentiality of CUI. Now, CSF, as I mentioned earlier, is a much higher level of abstraction. And so these documents all can work together. So you can use the cybersecurity framework as kind of the bones or the scaffolding, right? And then these other documents like 800, 171, 853, the CIS controls, which was one of the first implementation, implementation examples to be, or not implementation, informative reference. Sorry. One of the first informative references to be published to CSF 2.0. You use these informative references all to achieve the outcomes in the CSF. So they really work together. And one of the tools I think that too few practitioners, particularly MSPs, know about is like our online informative references database, or OLEAR. And the OLEAR program really is designed to help you look at relationships across publications. And so you can pull up the CSF 2.0 and you can sort and filter and export and say, I only want to look at CSF 2.0 as it's mapped to CIS version 8. I think that's the most recent version that's in OLEAR. Yes. Or look at it as it's mapped to 800, 171 or 853 or multiple. I want to look at all of them. And so as you begin working with multiple documents, or as you're required to work with multiple documents, and you want to see where they kind of overlap or where there are commonalities, you can begin to use this database to begin to see those relationships. And so the online informative references tool is one such tool where you can do that. When we published CSF 2.0, we also published it not as just a PDF, but also as an online tool. And so you can also use the CSF 2.0 reference tool to look at the informative references and begin to see those relationships.
I think it's important. I mean, I think it's, and we get this question a lot just as CIS, is that what are the different levels of the framework, right? So what you do is you see CSF as a requirement in legislation and different things, and organizations are like, well, how do I implement this, right? And so I think that the important thing is that even NIST will say, you use other frameworks to implement the CSF. The CSF is more like a policy kind of framework at this level, but then the other ones like the controls, like the -53 and the 171 are ways to implement.
That's right.
The CSF.
Yep.
So we're going to switch gears. I mean, we did cover the small business primer for the 171. I think you did kind of cover how it is different than the main standard as I'm reading the question now. So, and also in the interest of time, I'm going to hand it over to Chris.
Yeah, thanks, Phyllis. Yeah, I got a couple questions for you, Daniel. So first of all, what prompted the updates from Rev 2 to Rev 3 on 800/171?
Yeah, and I'll be transparent that I'm part of the CSF team and lead the small business efforts, but I'm not part of the 800/171 team, and so I wasn't even part of that update process. But that was led by Vicky Pelletieri and Ron Ross in the computer security division. But I think there were a lot of similarities with. Yeah, we could probably have other people say much better than me. But a lot of what happened with the CSF, right? We issued a request for information for people to submit comments. The state of practice had evolved over the years as far as how to address certain risks and controls. And so the update includes kind of updated security requirements, more specificity in the requirements. There was more alignment to 853 Rev 5. And so I think they looked at the document to remove some redundancy. And so those are some of the reasons. And again, it came back to stakeholder engagement and talking to those who are using it to solicit feedback and move the document into a full revision.
That makes sense. All right. I'll go back into your lane then. So I won't give you any more questions. But you did a good job. Hey, so we talked about the fact that small businesses, they don't have a security team. They probably don't even know what cybersecurity is a lot of times. They know they just don't want to be hacked. How does a primer make these requirements more approachable? I know we kind of touched upon it, but can you go elaborate a little bit more on what you guys have done to make it more approachable for these small businesses and even the MSPs themselves, easier to consume and be able to put into effect?
Yeah, I mean, we tried to break it up into, I mean, as I said, AI 171, like many of our publications, it's a lot to take when you just sit down and look at it. And the language, some of the language is kind of challenging for a non-cybersecurity professional, or even for even cybersecurity professionals. Some of the language that is used sometimes is very maybe governmenty. I'll say. And so, with the primer, really, what I was trying to do with CSF and with the 800-171, again, is just to make sure that we're trying to write it in a way that is a little more consumable by a non-cybersecurity professional. And as we were talking to small businesses throughout the drafting process, I initially only had the primer as being the first the first like 3 pages, which was kind of the overview and all of that. And I was getting feedbacks like, you really need to go into all the families. And I was like, oh my God, this is going to turn into a massive document. But then as we started playing with it, I was like, actually, there's a way we can do this that's manageable. And again, a business, it's not expected that a business can go to this primer and it's the full, they're going to get the full, entree. It's an appetizer to just get people thinking about the big concepts and breaking down some of the foundational elements of 800-171. So that's really what we were trying to achieve with it. And I'm also going to be following up with it. Vicki and I are going to be running a webinar on November 4th to discuss the primer. And so trying to get at helping them understand kind of what are the components of this primer. And I'll add to the comment that just came in. I did figure out how to look at comments, so yay. You're right. And one of the things that we tried to do in this primer, one of the things that I tried to emphasize in the primer is the relationship between 171 and 171A. And one of the things that I would love your input on at some point, and one of the things we're going to talk about in the webinar coming up is, Vicki really wants to do some sort of small business focused resource for 800-171A. And I'm on board to make that happen. And so looking at, is a primer another way to do it, or is there the way to do it, or is there another way we could achieve this, a better way we could achieve it? What are the pieces of 800-171A that we should be focusing on? And so we're going to start grappling with that here soon. But we thought it was first, we needed to start with 171, educate people on that one, give them a little dose of it, and then move into 171A.
If I could be so bold, Daniel, I'd recommend Andy Sauer is Sentinel Blue. He'd be a great one to have on. He's level 2 certified and has done a number of full assessments for CMMC level 2. And I think it'd be cool if he could be on, this is just me talking, be on the webinar to kind of give that kind of real feet on the ground, right? What he's seeing, where's the resistance, and and when he is getting full cooperation. But now that things are fully in motion with the OMB, and we've got full traction with contract language, he'd be a great person. So I highly encourage that. Phyllis, I know you got to jump at 2. So in closing, Daniel, I will say first, in case I lose Phyllis, thank you as always for jumping on. It was great to have you with us, Daniel. Fantastic. Just kind of contextualizing what you're doing. Awesome to see that NIST is putting efforts and energy into the small business area. And yeah, I just really grateful for you to do that for us. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Eric. I mean, thanks, Daniel. And I was just thinking, I don't want to see Eric on a boat anymore because it made me envious the whole time I'm on this.
I apologize for that. Daniel, thank you for joining us and giving us your knowledge. It's extremely helpful and nice to know that we have a resource out there like you to help us along when we need it.
Thank you. And thanks to all of you. And thanks to all of you for being in attendance today. And never hesitate. I think looks like you put my LinkedIn message. Please don't hesitate to reach out. I am here and I take meetings one-on-one in group, and I want to hear kind of how you're using NIST publications with the small business community and what we can do to help. That's my job. And so I want to hear from you.
Perfect. Eric, thanks for joining us from the 7 Seas, wherever you're at these days. And Chris,
thank you for having me.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. Thanks for all you attending. Make it a great week, everybody. Take care.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks.
Thanks.